Greetings, fellow stone skipping enthusiasts. I'm Skipper Chris, and today I'm going to show you how I make my precision-engineered concrete skipping rocks. Check it out. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm making my own concrete skipping rocks when I could just be using natural stones like this one. Well, here on the North Island of New Zealand in Rotorua, pretty much all the rocks we have are volcanic, like this pumice and ignimbrite, and they're just totally unsuitable for skipping. So I decided I'd have to make my own rocks. I started by just forming blobs of concrete and squishing them flat, just to imitate sort of the natural, irregular shape of a regular stone. And these actually work quite well, provide a good, clean, consistent skip, and just get the feel of actually skipping a natural rock, but in something that I could make exactly how I needed. With that, I decided that I'd start printing molds and stamping more precision, repeatable shapes just to get a bit more consistent stones for practicing, and moved on with experimenting with geometry, edge profiles, bottom concavity and convex shapes, all the different variables there are to sort of tweak in and adjust the perfect stone for skipping. So have a look and see how I make these rocks. Now, the way I've been producing these rocks for the past 2 years is with these 3D printed molds. So I designed these in SolidWorks, 3D print them on our Pressure MK3 printer, and just glue together the two pieces, and you've got this nice little handheld stamp that you can just pop out tons of rocks really easily using this method I've developed. So printing a mold allows you to get some nice little internal fillet features on the stamp side of the rock, and just gets you a really consistent outer perimeter shape and consistent thickness, so you can make sort of perfect batches of identical stones, which makes it really good for practice, and it's really good for having a good time getting some perfect skips. So I've tried a bunch of different shapes over the years. Round ones are actually probably the worst, interestingly enough. We can talk about that more later. But some of my favorites are these heptagons. They give you a nice grip around the edge, just sort of that multi-sided faceted look. But the squares and triangles have also been performing well lately. Really, you can make pretty much any shape skip as long as you've got something to grip when you're holding it. The four main ingredients that go into these rocks are Portland cement, sand, clay, and water. The Portland cement obviously is the binder that cures and brings the rock to its final solid shape. The sand is added to increase the density of the stone. The clay is added to improve the workability of the mixture while it's wet, allow it to form better, and the water obviously is required in the chemical reaction to cure the cement. Now, the sand I'm using is a bit special. This is iron sand, which is an extremely dense black sand made mostly of magnetite. I find this stuff along the shores of Lake Rotorua, where it washes up along the beaches in pure deposits, making it easy to collect. I use iron sand because its high density allows me to get heavier stone while maintaining an optimum ratio of sand to cement. Now, this means that I can mix a concrete with a smoother, less grainy consistency than if I used just regular silica sand. So the ratios that I mix this all together in isn't super precise, but I have sort of tuned it in to something that I find works well to produce a rock of the right density. So I'm going to put in half of one of these scoops of cement. I'm going to do 1.5 scoops of iron sand. And half a scoop of clay. Now, before I add the water, I like to give this a bit of a dry mix, just to get it sort of stirred around a bit. Just makes it easier because you don't have to mix it as much when it's wet. So once I've done the dry mix, I'll start adding my water. You want to add this slowly, unless you know the exact right amount to add off the bat, which you really don't. So I'm just going to slowly sprinkle this in, sort of keep mixing as I go. Just like making cookie dough. Now, if you add too much water, you can always just sprinkle in a bit more of the Portland cement to get back the consistency you want. And just like making baked goods, you want to be sure to scrape the sides of the bowl to get all the dry material off before you think that you're fully mixed. All right, now this is about the stage where I'm going to need to put some gloves on. So getting the right consistency of this is pretty important for making this process work well. So you want something that can sort of hold a blob in your hands, but when it squeezes, sort of squish out to the shape of the rock. You want it to not break and crumble as it does this, so you want it to be pretty moist, but not so soft that it'll actually just sort of free flow as it goes. This seems about right. Now, before you get started next, you're going to want to prepare your work surface. I'm just using a sheet of acrylic here, and what this gives me is something that's smooth, but also a bit flexible, so you can easily pop the rocks off when you're done. If you don't have something like this and you're just working on a tabletop, you can easily just lay down a sheet of plastic wrap as the bottom face, and it works just as well. All right, so once you've got your work surface set up, it's time to lay out some concrete. So I just use my hand, grab a blob of cement, about the right size. You can measure this, but I've sort of learned by eye what works well. Just plop that on the table. I usually do 2 or 3 of these at a time. So, put a few more out. If you have too much, the cement will just squeeze out the sides of the mold when you stamp it, so no real loss there. If you don't add enough, you won't get the pressure inside the mold that sort of fills it fully to the corners, and you'll wind up with an undermolded, sort of rounded, poor quality rock. So lay those out, nicely spaced out. So now I'm going to lay some plastic wrap down on top of these, and grab my 3D printed mold. Press down while just slowly vibrating it to shape, and then lift straight up, and there's your rock. And you can of course make different shapes depending on the mold that you're using. So here's a heptagon. There you go. That is a really nice smooth surface there. That's perfect. So if you're doing this and you don't have access to 3D printed molds, you don't need anything special. Just a flat surface. So you can just sort of freehand squish the rock down, check the profile of it, and just make sure you're evenly flattening it around, and you'll wind up with something that is pretty much just as good. And this is going to require a bit more post-processing to get the final smooth edges, but just give a little touch up with the finger, smooth out the surface, you're good to go. Let's make some different shapes. There's a square, and here is a small semi-rockered heptagon. Look at that, we just made some rocks. Now once these have sat for about a day or two to cure, you can demold them and move on to the next steps of edge grinding and then moisture curing. And here are some that I prepared earlier. So now that these rocks have sat for about a day for curing, they're ready to demold and sort of remove the mold flash and do a quick sort of rough deburring on the edges just to smooth them out. Because they're only a day old, they're going to be pretty fragile, so you've got to work with them pretty gently. But the longer you wait, the harder the concrete's going to be, so then that makes it a more time-consuming process. So yeah, let's go ahead and give these a peel. So plastic wrap comes off easily, and then just sort of flexing the sheet will release them. They should all pop off nicely. And so I just go and I can just very gently break off these edges. Oh, these are quite soft. I'm gonna have to be very careful with these. So yeah, you just separate them. I'm just gonna pull all these free, and then we'll do all the edges together. So here's what one of these stamped stones looks like, fresh off the molding table. So we've got on the top surface, where the 3D printed stamp came down, formed it to shape. Nice smooth surface with little fillets on the edges from the stamp. On the bottom side, obviously it's just dead flat because that's what was sitting on the acrylic sheet. And on the edge, we've got a bit of sort of mold flash of where excess concrete is squeezed out from the edges. So what we've got to do is true up the edges, remove the flash, and put a symmetric fillet on here, top and bottom, to make the rock fly right. So because these rocks are really fresh, they've only cured for a day, the concrete's really soft. I do need to be pretty careful with this. If I dropped it from, a few inches off the table, it would easily break. But it means that I get to really quickly and easily carve it to shape using just a little handheld block of cement here. So I'm just working my way around the edge. First I just do a deburr of the whole contour, get the edge nice and square and true. Just brush that off and have a look. So you can see we've exposed the sort of coarse texture inside the rock rather than just the smooth outer molded bits. So now on the bottom side, that's just a nice 90-degree angle on that, but I want to put a bit of a chamfer on it just to sort of clean that up and make it so that I can skip the rock on this face if I want. Otherwise you'd wind up with these catching and digging into the water when they hit. And putting this chamfer on also helps to make the sort of overall cross-section of the rock symmetric, top and bottom, which makes it fly a bit better through the air, not either peel off the water or stick too hard, depending on which way you skip it. So you can even sort of smooth it and remove that last little bit of crumbs with your hands. And that is looking like a good rock. So usually when I do this, I'm wearing gloves, but these rocks are pretty dry, so I'm not worried about my hands getting wet with the concrete mix. When you're working with cured and uncured concrete, you definitely want to have gloves on because it is sort of a caustic chemicals are coming out of here, a bit basic. But for most stuff, you're fine. The worst case, you get a little bit of, your skin falls off. It's not that bad. Probably one of the key areas to get nice and ground smooth is the corners, because that's where your finger's going to grip, and that's going to be one of the pieces that sort of drags on the water. You want a nice grippy point on all of these, depending on how you want to skip it. So now we've got a good stack of rocks here. So the next stage is to get these moisture cured. So once the concrete's been through, I think about a 24-hour cure time with whatever water you mixed into it. After that, you want to keep it nice and moist so the chemical reaction can finish off nicely. So I just put these into one of my little bins and give them a little sprinkle of water. Luckily, it's about 85% humidity year-round here in New Zealand, so things stay moist all the time. All right, now that these rocks have finished moisture curing, it's time to just rinse off the residues from curing as well as the sand and grit that may remain on the surface. Just get it nice and smooth, ready for the next steps of painting. So once the rocks are rinsed, I like to just lay them out to dry for a couple days, and once they're dry, we get to move on to painting. Now for painting the rocks, I use a pretty basic water-based interior-exterior primer, and so this serves two purposes. The first of which obviously is to make the rocks more visible when they're out there in the water, so I can find them again. And the second sort of incidental result is that the painted surface gives a bit of a smoother skip across the water. I initially was just painting the tops because I didn't want to mess with that natural sort of stone texture of the cement, since it does actually provide a very consistent skip. But the painted bottoms, not only does it help give you a better glide across the water surface, but if the rock flips over, you can still find it. So I'll usually just do 1 or 2 coats of white primer on both sides of these rocks, leaving the edges untouched for good grip. And then once that's dry, I just lay the rocks out on some cardboard and hit them with a high visibility orange paint, and that makes them really, really easy to find. I have been doing a lot just white lately, but the orange does help a lot, especially when you're in slightly murky or dark water. Once the paint's dry, rocks are all ready to go, so head out for a skip and let's see how they perform. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video of me in my garage showing how I make my custom concrete skipping stones. If you like what you see, be sure to subscribe and check out my other videos. And, well, as always, I'll see you next time.